Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Sherry Dunn, and I'm the CEO and principal of ITBOM Consulting, and I'm also on the Oregon Workforce Talent Development Board. And I'm so excited to welcome you all today. As you know, the Oregon Business Plan has been exploring strategies to think about how we can have shared prosperity and an equitable recovery for Oregonians in the face of COVID and so many other challenges. This is the fourth in the series of leadership summits, and so we are so glad you can be here for this one. Today, the Workforce Talent and Development Board is excited to partner with the Oregon Business Plan to explore the importance of workforce and talent development and shared prosperity. We're going to hear from state and national thought leaders, and we're going to feature a panel of Workforce Talent Development Board members who are going to share their perspectives on what it takes to reimagine how we better connect Oregonians to good jobs and serve the needs of employers. We're also going to touch on the importance of a strong workforce for our economic well-being and acknowledge that there is a very disproportionate impact on this pandemic and on job losses on communities of color and low-income Oregonians. We also want to talk about how we address the need for more seamless and collaborative intentional approaches that lead to the shared prosperity that we're speaking of. And we're going to start the program this afternoon. We're going to hear first from Ben Cannon. Ben Cannon is the executive director of the Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Committee, the HEC. He has held this position since 2013, and prior to joining the HEC, Ben was the policy advisor for Governor Kitzhaber and also served as an elected state representative from the 46th district. And so we are so excited to hear from Ben. Ben?
Thanks, Sherry, and it's a real pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. My job this afternoon is very simple: to introduce you to the HEC and to share a little with you about the state's goals for post-secondary educational attainment. And if we could cue the next slide. In a nutshell, the HEC is a commission, a 14-member volunteer commission that leads a state agency that I oversee that goes by the same name, the HEC, that is focused on improving success in higher education and training for Oregonians through our support for workforce programs, our support for college and other career training options. It's important to note that when we talk about higher education, we have a really wide range of activities in mind, from apprenticeships and 2-year career certificates to 2- and 4-year degrees and doctorates. So we don't focus narrowly on colleges and universities, but look broadly at post-secondary activities beyond high school. Next slide. Our vision for post-secondary education in Oregon is one in which all Oregonians, and particularly those who have been marginalized by our systems, benefit from the transformational power of post-secondary education and training. And you can see the number of entities that we partner with, both community and institutional leaders and partners. Next slide. We are responsible for helping set state goals for post-secondary educational attainment, and I'll say more about those in a couple of minutes. We support the attainment of those goals by administering the state's budget for post-secondary education and workforce activities, about $1.4 billion per year, by administering or authorizing programs and degrees at our public colleges and universities, by administering state financial aid programs and providing policy leadership for state leaders, including the governor and the legislature. We directly administer financial aid and workforce programs that directly serve thousands of Oregonians. Next slide. Our strategies involve outreach, they involve reporting, they involve funding administration, and they involve creating clear pathways for learners from high school to college, from college to the workforce, between and among colleges and training providers. We don't govern post-secondary education or workforce in Oregon, but we do help coordinate, fund, and support it. Next slide. Next slide. I want to spend my remaining few minutes this afternoon just walking you through the goals that the state of Oregon has set for post-secondary education and training, and with a particular focus on our goals for adult Oregonians. But I want to start in what will be for many of you a familiar spot, and that is Oregon's statutory 40-40-20 goal. This goal expresses the state's expectations that 40% of young adult Oregonians will not only complete high school, but go on and earn a 4-year degree or higher. An additional 40% will earn a 2-year degree or a short-term career certificate, and an additional 20% will complete high school, together comprising the full 100% of our young adults. And as the slide describes, we have set this goal as a state, we put it in law because of our understanding of the relationship between higher levels of education and wages and other civic and public benefits. The legislature recently, with the HEC, established that this goal applies to young adult Oregonians, and it separately invited the HEC and the Oregon Workforce Talent and Development Board to collaborate in setting a goal that is specific to our adult population, not those who have just those who have recently graduated from high school, but our entire population of working age adults. Next slide. And next slide. And that goal is described here, and it is that by the year 2030, we will, 300,000 adult Oregonians will earn a new degree, certificate, or other credential of value, and that Oregon will reduce the adult educational attainment gaps by half for underserved people of color, low-income learners, and rural learners during this decade. Our commission, along with the Workforce Talent and Development Board, recognize that too many adult Oregonians lack the financial stability that more education and training can provide. And as we've seen in this recession, as we've seen in prior recessions, one's access to and success in post-secondary education in the form of some sort of credential, certificate, or degree is a strong determinant of one's ability to maintain employment during difficult economic times for our state, for our country. We likewise understand, as we look towards the future, the economy of the future, that increasingly jobs, and especially good jobs, will require higher levels of education and training, and it is our responsibility as a state and as a system to provide adult Oregonians, not just recent high school graduates, with opportunities to train and retrain to meet the needs of a changing economy. Next slide. To reach that ambitious goal of 300,000 adults in Oregon earning post-secondary credential between now and 2030, we have to significantly increase our efforts. At our current pace, we would hit about 200,000 new credentials delivered to adults. So this would represent about a 50% increase in our ability to deliver and serve adult Oregonians through education and training beyond high school. It's a ambitious goal that we look forward to working with the Workforce and Talent Development Board, with employers, with legislators, with community leaders, and other partners to help to meet. It's going to take all hands on deck. It's going to take likely state investment, state coordination, a state plan. I'm very excited about what today's conversation, and in particular, the work of the Workforce Talent and Development Board in helping flesh out that plan with the Oregon Business Plan will mean for the state. Last slide. Some opportunities here to stay engaged with our work at the HEC. Among our other responsibilities is to staff the Workforce and Talent Development Board. So our team at the HEC will be working closely with them to take lessons learned from this summit and future events to help populate a plan for the state of Oregon to ensure that these ambitious goals are met for the future of Oregon and the future of all adult Oregonians. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you so much, Ben. I mean, Ben is talking about how we skill up both young people and adults in Oregon. And we know that COVID-19 and the pandemic has changed so many things. We are now virtual. Many of you are at home, some of you may be in your offices. We are going to work differently. So the question is, how will we learn differently, and what impact will that have on the jobs of the future? Where will they be, and where will they be lost? And to speak to that, our next speaker today is John Tapanya, who is the president of Echo Northwest. He oversees the firm's business strategy, and he has been at Echo Northwest since 1977. He's built a very strong consulting practice in education, healthcare, human services, and tax policy. John has done a lot of work for the Oregon Workforce Talent Development Board and has a really good sense of of what the impact may be and what the impact is now on the workforce. And so I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thank you, Sherry. Well, you couldn't have two different presentations. If we go back 220 days, we were doing presentations to the Workforce and Talent Development Board about the tail end of the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. And the big questions from a talent perspective and a workforce development perspective in that time was, where are we going to find more and more people on the sidelines who are outside of the labor force to pull them in? And employers were doing that. They were doubling down and trying to find more and more people to do the work that they needed so they could continue to grow. And then around 220 days ago, as we're all aware, the pandemic hit. And we shut down and the economy changed very drastically. So I'm going to step through. Since then, the Workforce and Talent Development Board has engaged with Echo Northwest to take a look at the sector that is at the center of this challenge, the leisure and hospitality sectors. This recession has hit all industries in the state, but right at ground zero are your restaurants, your bars, your movie theaters, your sporting events, and the like. So let's move through and tell that story. Next slide, please. So this is what drives it. We close the economy to save it. What you're looking at here are spending benchmarked back to January of 2020 in a variety of different ways. So this is for Oregon, and the red line is what happened to total spending off of credit and debit cards over time, and then the blue line are restaurants and hotels, and that greenish color is the entertainment and recreation sector. So you can see that big drop in April, down about a third for overall spending, but big precipitous decline. Look at that 80% reduction in spending on restaurant, hotels, entertainment, recreation, et cetera. That spending has recovered overall. As you can see, we're now back to just a 4.5% reduction or so in total spending, but restaurants still down, restaurants and hotels still down a third, and entertainment and recreation even farther behind, more than half. So that's what drives it. And then what happens to the economy when all that spending gets constrained? Let's take a look at the next slide. Just a precipitous decline in employment. So look at this. This is employment in Oregon's leisure and hospitality sector dating back to 1990. And what this chart is telling you, it's an index, is that in April and May, the number of people who were employed in the leisure and hospitality sector in Oregon, there were fewer of them than there were in 1990, 30 years ago, which is just absolutely remarkable, precipitous decline. And then you can see that coming back by September, we still weren't back up to the level of people that were employed at the trough of the Great Recession. So yes, we've had a rebound, as you can see, but there's an awful long ways left, and a lot of former employees that are on the sidelines and out of work. Let's take a look at the next slide. We're going to step through and sort of see the characteristics. These are characteristics of the employees in that sector. We have to go back in time to look at the census to see what the sort of the profile of these workers are. As Sherry gave a hint, because she's seen this report, of some of their characteristics. Here you can see in sort of 5-year buckets or 4-year buckets. They trend young. Leisure and hospitality, as you can imagine, walking into restaurants and coffee shops and the like. You do have an awful lot of folks sort of in their 20s and into their early 30s, et cetera. A fair amount for those younger profiles of part-time work, but this workforce trends to the younger end. Next slide, please. And it is different in very specific ways. Disproportionately female by 7 percentage points. Those that were engaged in this sector, 41% in 2018, were living below 200% of the federal poverty level. So they weren't all poor, but they were either poor or near poor households, and disproportionate share of them part-time. So you've got fewer part-time workers than households that are engaged in other industries. Next slide, please. We also have disproportionate representation of Hispanic households, Asian, and a small disproportionate participation by Black and American Indian, American Native in this sector as well. Next slide. Also, and very important to keep in mind for the Workforce and Talent Development Board, these are the share of workers, again, back in 2018, who held an associate's degree or higher. So on the left-hand side, those are the younger end, the 25 to 50 year old in leisure and hospitality versus other industries. And then on the right-hand side, the 51 to 64 year olds. Basically, what this is telling you is that, less than a third of the people who were working in that sector, sort of beyond their college, traditional college years, held an associate's degree or higher, quite a bit lower than in those other industries. So I would pause here to say, you've got an awful lot of these workers now on the sidelines, and a big opportunity to engage them. A big opportunity for the state with these individuals. Not a lot of opportunities in the labor force for them at the moment. An opportunity to reach out and skill up. Next slide, please. This one, why don't we go ahead and blow that one up? It gives you a sense of where the skills fall for the whole variety of occupations that are sitting in this leisure and hospitality sector. So this takes a little bit of time to absorb. If you're sort of at the top of this chart, these are skills that emphasize clerical and service work. You go to the sort of the 3 o'clock on the dial, that's work on the right-hand side that is more physical in nature. If you go to the bottom, those are occupations that have more emphasis on operating machines and processes. And if you go to the left, more emphasis on communication and critical thinking. And so what we've done here in blue is highlighted all these various occupations that sit in that leisure and hospitality sector. You've got waiters and waitresses and maids and restaurant cooks and bartenders up in the right-hand corner. In the right-hand lower quadrant, you've got maintenance and repair workers. On the left-hand side, you've got food service managers, frontline supervisors, customer service reps and the like, and then you've got chefs and head cooks in the bottom left-hand. So bottom line here is we're all over the map. Obviously a concentration in that upper right-hand corner. But in terms of trying to think about how workforce and talent development, workforce agencies, community colleges, and employers engage, look at the skills in and around the skills that these workers have already been practicing in their most recent work activity, and see if there's something in those gray areas, which are occupations in other industries that might be drawing on similar skills, but are outside of that leisure and hospitality sector and may not be subject to the same kind of social distancing constraints that we have in that sector. So that's a look at sort of the skill map of the individuals who have been most directly affected by social distancing in this pandemic. Next slide, please. So in terms of how you might operationalize what we just talked about there, there's this wonderful site. You can go on it right now. I just did this one yesterday called My Skills, My Future. We actually talked about this in the 2020 Talent Assessment Report that we put out in March. This is a site where you can sort of type in, this is a career, somebody who may have just lost a job as a first line supervisor of food prep and serving. And I just shot in there that I'm looking for openings within 25 miles of my zip code, 97213. And here it popped up, 72 listings for production planning and expediting clerks who coordinate and expedite the flow of work and materials, or first line supervisors of personal service workers, et cetera. So how do we get better? I think the sort of the old mindset, as I remember it, is, boy, we've got unemployed workers, and boy, it seems like an awful lot of people are working in technology and need to use spreadsheets or learn how to code and that kind of thing. That is certainly going to work, and is a productive sort of bridge for some workers, but maybe not for all. And so, how do we get more intentional and more personalized in making this kind of matching between where somebody has exited the workforce and where they might find a lifeboat and a place to reenter in an industry that is adjacent to the one that they just left. So again, this My Skills, My Future, I think, is a nice first shot at that. Another, on the next slide, another place to look, we've had a couple of different talent assessment reports. Back in 2018, we invited Joseph Fuller from the Harvard Business School to come out. And one of the main points that he landed on was the need to expand apprenticeships outside of its core in manufacturing and the construction trades, that those opportunities to sort of mix work and income with learning has been so valuable and well developed in manufacturing and construction, and in many other industries in Germany and Switzerland and other places across the world. But where are there opportunities? What are the occupations where an apprenticeship might be amenable outside of that core of manufacturing and construction? Fuller, when he was here in 2018, gave us a list of probably 30 plus different occupations that lent themselves to this model. What we've done here is look at that skills map and sort of step through the occupations that are adjacent and close to those skills for the leisure and hospitality workers. So our instruction to Oregon here is to, well, let's sit down and see, if you're trying to get off of Fuller's list of 30 and try to figure out a place to start, maybe this list of 7 it would be an appropriate place to start, given that we have so many sidelined leisure and hospitality workers in front of us right now. Also, I would point you to the Workforce and Talent Development Board's website. Bob Lehrman from the Urban Institute has also put out a nice white paper on opportunities for apprenticeship in Oregon going forward. So that gives you sort of the deep dive into leisure and hospitality. Now I'm just going to conclude before I pass it back to Sherry with a couple of points on the outlook ahead. So why don't we go to the next slide? A key that I think I want folks to think about as they're thinking about workforce right now is, we've talked an awful lot about the importance of automation, about the elimination of routine work, and how it's going to disrupt some occupations, maybe even really destroy a limited number of them as well. That is important, and we need to be keeping an eye on training people to interact with more automation than they have in the past. That's an impetus for what Ben has talked about in terms of getting people skilled up. But at the same time, we can't forget about another major trend, and that's demography. So let's take a look at a couple of charts from our Office of Economic Analysis and Josh Lerner. We'll go to the next slide. This first one, I think I've presented it maybe 2 or 3 times this week, and it's one that I would cut out and put on the wall for anybody who cares about the future of Oregon. Our natural rate of population growth is about to go negative for the first time in a century. So, Oregon has always thought of itself as a place that's just where growth is just going to happen. And we are later in this decade in a period where, if we don't have in-migration, our population will gradually decline. And now let's take another look from Josh Lerner on this next slide. The retirements are here. So we've had sort of surges and spikes and bumps, et cetera, in retirements over the course of the last couple of decades. but these projections for the office show a steady, sustained high level of retirements beginning this decade that we haven't experienced in that kind of routine sense in the past. And so the important point here to sort of drive home is, yes, there are some challenges with automation, and yes, they may create a headwind for job creation, especially around that routine work. But at the same time, you are going to have job openings created by these retirements, and we need to be thinking about the demography along with the automation at the same time. So with that, Sherry, I'll turn it back to you, and we'll keep moving.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Thanks so much, John. John lays out the fundamental issues that we are grappling with, right? The big changes around employment, the huge drop in the service industry, something we have not seen probably since the Great Depression, with the number of jobs lost. And the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board is looking at ways to address some of these issues. We have an adult learning advisory committee that is looking at credentials of value, stackability, and transferability. These kind of things are going to be incredibly important as we look to how we go forward and what the future of work looks like. And today we have a guest who's going to talk about the future of work and maybe bust some myths about how we get to that future and training. We are lucky to be joined today by Paul Osterman. He is the NTU professor at MIT Sloan School of Management. He is a member of the Department of Urban Planning at MIT, and from July 2003 to 2007, he served as the deputy dean at the MIT Sloan School. His research concerns changes in work organizations within companies, career patterns, process within firms, economic development, as well as urban poverty, policy planning surrounding skills training and employment programs. Paul has been a senior administrator of job training programs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and has consulted widely for government agencies, foundations, community groups, firms, and public interest organizations. And I'd like to introduce now Paul Osterman.
Thank you very much, Sherry, and greetings from the other side of the country. I'm really happy to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to talk about two things. One is I'm going to spend maybe 10 minutes or even less talking about some broad themes around the future of work. And then I'm going to spend most of my time talking about job training and the job training system and some thoughts about where you all might think about going. That was good. Let me actually spend a minute reacting to what I just heard. I really appreciated both those presentations. I thought that what Ben said, particularly around the challenge around adults and the goals that you all have for adults, is very, very important. And if I understand the role of the heck, I'm calling it the heck. He called it the hack, but it looks to me like it's spelled the heck. It's coordinating across different institutions. It's talking about how the community college system works with the job training system, for example. And that is really fundamental. And that's something I'm going to talk about later on in my conversation. In terms of John's comments, he's absolutely right about the demography. I have a slide that I'll talk very fast through because it makes exactly the point he made. I do want to say one thing about the word apprenticeship, and that is, apprenticeship should best be thought of, at least I think of best of it, as really meaning integrating workplace experience with training. That can happen in a community college program. That can happen in a job training program. That can happen when IBM sets up a high school called P-Tech. That can happen when Toyota works with community colleges and high schools around its FAME program. There's many, many different venues for integrating work-based experience with training and education. So the apprenticeship is kind of a word that's loaded in some senses and may imply a lot more, a particular structure or format Don't think of it that way. Think of it as this integration. And the reason that's important is both because it enables kids or adults to have a better training and learning experience, but it's also a way of seducing employers to care about the system. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking about how you get employers to pay attention to what you all are doing, because that's a big challenge. So this kind of workplace-based education has that double virtue to it, this twofold goal. And that's really quite important. Okay, so now I'm going to move on and try and, okay. So let me just begin by saying we should all be humble in thinking about the future, right? So think about 1960 when Kennedy was elected president. Blue collar work dominated the economy. Computer programming wasn't even an official census category. Well under 50% of women were in the workforce. The best-selling business book was The Organization Man. No one in 1960 could have predicted that none of this was going to be true today. And so be careful of those of us who pretend to talk about the future. It's fake news to think that we face a jobless future. It's fake news to think that we face the Uberization of work. And I'll give you a little data on both of those fake pieces of news. By contrast, what is true is that technology will require that people obtain skills and adjust. Technology will require that, or rather, unless we take action, and this is something that Sherry talked about, far too many people will continue to hold low-wage jobs. It's also true that skill, and John spoke to this, skill requirements absolutely will be in the reach of most people. We're not going to become a nation of hamburger flippers or rocket scientists with nothing in between. And it is also true, and I'm going to talk about this at length, that we have a human capital system with many strengths and it's also effective, but it needs a lot of work to improve it. The jobless future is an invention by pundits to sell newspapers. Think about word processing. It's affected all of us. The typing pool is gone, absolutely, but new jobs have been created. Administrative assistants do a lot more than they ever did. It's a good job now, and many technologies have this characteristic. They stimulate the creation of new jobs. If you look at having a little trouble flipping, where people work, and this is from research that I've done, fully 80%, over 80% of workers are standard W-2 employees. Freelancers in their first job are about 8%, and people who work for one firm and are assigned somewhere else are about 11%. We're not becoming a nation of gig workers. We're not becoming a nation of temporary help workers. We're not becoming a nation of freelancers. We're fundamentally still a nation of standard employees. Now, there are important public policy questions around freelancing and contract work. I'm not going to talk about that unless it comes up in a discussion, but don't think that we're becoming an Uberized economy. COVID-19, so what's new? So obviously, as John talked about, we need to help people move. We need to help people move from being a restaurant worker, for example, into healthcare. We do need to worry that firms are going to look at their risk profile and decide to people-proof themselves by accelerating automation. But the implications of this are that what we're talking about today are even more important than before, and the demands and the expectations on all of us are going to grow and going to grow quite a bit. So this is my slide illustrating John's point. So take production workers, who are a very endangered occupation. The number of production workers are going to decline overall in the economy, but the openings for production workers are going to be very, very positive, depending on when people retire. So this is a lesson that applies across the board. I picked production workers because we all know that they're quote going away because of robots. Guess what? There's going to be a lot of hiring of production workers, and that's true across the board. Okay. Let me now spend the rest of my time talking about job training and our system. So the United States has a remarkably complex job training system. So we have school-based programs, and you can see what these are, right? From CTE in high schools, career academies, apprenticeships, community colleges, proprietary schools. Adults get training through community colleges. Adults get training through proprietary schools. Adults get training through these new models. Companies train people. obviously. And then there's this entire remedial catching up sector of programs. So you look at this and you think, oh my God, it's complex, it's hard to navigate, it makes no sense. But that's really not quite the case. Let's move ahead. So the critique is that it's complicated, it's poorly articulated, it's hard to navigate. The other critique is that nothing works. But on that first critique, it's also open, it's flexible, it permits you to change your mind, it reflects the realities of our job market. I could be, I don't have the talent, but I could be a professor today and I could decide to become a plumber tomorrow. And there's a program out there, there's an institution out there that will teach me to do it. That's not true in other countries. That's not true in these other European countries that are always pointed out or claim to be much more organized than we are. Our system, that complicated system that I showed you on the previous slide, has a lot to recommend it. It's also the case that the critique that nothing works is wrong. A great deal works, and I'm going to show you evidence of that. So now what I'm going to do is just spend a minute showing you the results of a survey that I did. I did this survey in January of 2020, just before the world ended. And it describes how adults, it was about adults ages 24 to 64, what they do for their own training outside of their firms. If you're an adult, where do you go to look for getting new skills? And what it shows is that only 2% of adults, that age group, used community colleges in the past 12 months prior to the survey. 10% used online training, but online training is a very diverse category. It includes looking at a YouTube video about how to fix something onto getting on a course, a Coursera course or an edX course or whatever. 1.5% of adults use proprietary schools, 1% of adults got training through their union, and about 2.8% got training through a community group. So what do you make from this? What you make from this is that it's only a minority of adults in the year prior to the survey made any effort to upgrade their skills. And outside of online training, under about 6% did anything else. And so those are not big numbers, those are not impressive numbers, and those are numbers that I think are a warning to us as we think about how to improve our system. I also asked people, trying to advance the slide here. Okay. I asked people how confident they were in the ability of these institutions to provide them with the training that they needed if they wanted training. What percentage of people in my sample, I have to tell you, my sample was a large sample and it's nationally representative, are confident in community colleges? Only about 20%. Online, 13. Proprietary, 16. Unions, 10. Community organizations, by that I mean job training programs, about 11. The vast majority of people do not express a high level of confidence in our institutions. And that is a second challenge we need to address. Now, in part, these are public relations challenges. These are information challenges, because I'm about to show you that community colleges and job training programs perform very well. At least many of them do. But people don't know that. They don't see it. Moving on, trying to move on. Move my slide ahead, please, one. I want to make the following points about the system. First point I want to make is that we know what works and what works well. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what the challenges are for the programs. Then I'm going to talk about the challenges for the system as a whole. And finally, I'm going to talk about how to build the system. So, the two forms of training I'm going to focus on are community colleges and intermediaries/job training programs. Community colleges are America's largest and by far the most important vocational training system. There are about 1,200 of these nationally. They offer credit to about 6 million. There's another 6 million people who are in non-credit courses. Going back to Ben's Ben's presentation, nearly half, about 40% of these people in the community colleges and the credit courses are over the age of 24. And I would imagine, we don't have good data on this, but the vast majority of the people in non-credit courses are over the ages of 24. Community colleges serve disproportionately minority, first generation, lower income people. Community colleges, when people get a degree, perform extremely well. So there's lots of research on this. Substantial benefits to completing a 2-year degree. Benefits, lesser but still positive, to getting a certificate. Simple attendance without completing a degree has only modest benefits. But when you get a degree, when you get a certificate in a community college, it pays off, and it pays off extremely well. So the argument that nothing works is, on the face of it, wrong. The problem with community colleges are the completion rates. Too many people get trapped in developmental education. It's very hard to navigate community colleges, and support services are often lagging. Managing community colleges is tough. They have multiple missions. They're transfer institutions. They work directly with firms on workforce issues. And I'll talk about the role of employers in a few minutes. Intermediaries are the modern term for job training programs. They're the evolution of the old second chance programs. Today, intermediaries are delivered by community groups, by business associations, and by governments. They're funded by foundations and the business associations and governments. I'm going to describe what they look like, but they're a minority of job training programs. The goal is to make them into the majority of job training programs. An intermediary thinks of itself as having two customers: the employer and the people who use their services. Intermediaries provide a high level of support services to their clients, to the people in them. They help them stay in the program. They help them with remediation. They provide small amounts of money when their car breaks down. They spend small amounts of money when their glasses break, for minor medical expenses. They have a support network, a national support network, a National Fund for Workforce Solutions, the Aspen Institute, Jobs for the Future. They're currently heavily foundation supported, and the goal is to move them into the public sphere at much higher levels. When intermediaries work, they work extremely well. This is a random assignment assessment of a top-level intermediary, Project Quest in Texas. It's 6 years out from participation, and you can see that participation relative to the control group led to about a $5,000 a year increase in income. And there are other intermediaries around the country with absolutely equivalent benefits to people when they participate in these intermediaries. What's the problem with intermediaries? It's not at scale. There's too few of them. We need to diffuse the best practice models, and we need to weed out the best players. Okay, what do both successful community colleges and intermediaries have in common? They have a strong connection to employers, and they provide support services, strong support services. Both intermediaries and community colleges have a dilemma. It's a difficult dilemma, and that is, you want to work with employers. I've said that about 10 times. Well, employers often want you to train people for their job that they need today. They want narrow, specific training for today's job. That's not necessarily in the interest of people who are getting the training, right? People who are getting the training need to have broader training for a lifetime of work. Both intermediaries and community colleges need to figure out a way to balance these two pressures out, to get employers to want them and to use them, but also to broaden the kind of training they provide. And that's a real challenge for an effective program. Building a system. What does building a system mean? It means convincing employers to take the system seriously, which is not the case in most of the country. It means getting workforce boards to work with these intermediaries, to be very serious about identifying quality and working with them and weeding out weak players. It means getting the big players in the system, the community colleges, the workforce boards, and intermediaries to play nice. So, for example, intermediaries could refer people to community colleges for training. It means making the system transparent to people. And it means actually bringing the one-stops, the employment service, in from the cold. Typically, when someone like me talks about the job training system or the community college system, they don't talk about the employment service. But you need somebody to help people navigate what I've just described. And that's the role of the one-stops. The one-stops typically, in most parts of the country, I can't talk about Oregon, are way behind the curve in terms of technology. They don't look like effective staffing services. They should look like effective staffing services. How do you make this all happen? It's a political problem. And I mean political, I don't know whether that's a large P or a small p, but it means getting employers, the workforce boards, the community colleges, the intermediaries, and community actors to sit down and actually have a serious conversation about building a system. The hard part, the two hard parts. One is getting employers to pay attention, and the other hard part is the political will to get these stovepipes to actually connect to each other. And that takes political will. It takes a governor and a legislature to really care about these issues and to take, to kick butt and to take names. So what does that mean? Let me step back a little bit. I'll come back to what that means, but I want to say two things about what are really kind of fashionable conversations right now about workforce training. One is the conversation about credentials, stackable, modular credentials. On the face of it, this makes great sense, right? Give people a credential that they can carry around. A credential is different but one question is, why is that credential any different than a community college degree or a community college certificate? But the other problem about the credential movement is that employers to date don't pay attention to these credentials. And there's a lot of evidence on this. Remember, the American labor market is a flexible system. As John said, when times were tight, employers were willing to be very flexible in their hiring requirements. When the labor market loosens and the unemployment rate is high, employers change their hiring requirements. Employers think they know what's best, and it's not at all clear that employers are going to pay attention to these credentials. I'm not telling you it's a bad idea, but I'm telling you it's not the salvation of building the system. The other thing is the transparency movement and training accounts, which is make it clear to people, and that's what I talked about before, the role of the one-stops, make it clear to people what's out there. Make information accessible, make performance data accessible, and so on. No one can argue that information is a bad thing. Information is a good thing. But I want to just push on the point that both the credential idea and the information idea only work when you put resources and work into building the system itself, into strengthening the institutions, into fixing the community colleges, into building out intermediaries. Only then does it work. So don't think of these kind of information credential things as the solution. They're a assistance to the solution when you've built out the institutions. Community colleges, they have to navigate these multiple missions. They have to adopt the best practices. That can be hard in some parts of the country where there's independent boards and they have their own tax districts, and they typically don't play well with other players out there. Employers are a challenge. Employers talk a good game. Oh, we need people, we care about skills. But typically, at least around the country, when I've talked to a community college, they can't get the employers to answer the phone. Intermediaries have a terrible time getting employers to answer the phone. They think of both systems as kind of poorly performing, which is wrong. And to some extent, they think of them as extensions of the welfare system, which is also wrong. And then there's the rhetoric around, oh, why can't the schools or why can't the intermediaries be business-like and behave like businesses? Well, they're not businesses. They have multiple constituencies. They have different pressures on them, and they have different goals. And so there's a real issue. Now, I'm not saying any of this to let intermediaries and community colleges off the hook. There's a lot to be done with them to improve them. But employers need to step up. So how do you get employers to step up? You need to think about incentives, for example, tax credits for training. You need to think about how schools and programs can be more effective in reaching out to employers. Industry associations, manufacturing associations, healthcare associations can play an important role in educating their members. There needs to be a role for jawboning, for the governor, for the legislature, to make the case to employers that they need to cooperate. And then there's a question of pressure. Government purchasing, employee voice as ways of moving the needle on getting employers to work with these programs for recruitment and hiring. So I'm about done. I just want to say the following. This isn't the first time in this country when we've cared a lot about training and skill. The war on poverty was a period in which training and skill was on the front burner. There's a period in the 1990s when we were worried about Germany and Japan, and we thought we were losing out competitively to them because we'd lacked training and skill. And it was absolutely on the agenda nationally and in states. I think we may be in a period like that now, partly because of our fears of technology, partly because of the demographics, and partly because of COVID, in which all of the players out there, employers, political leaders, training programs, really think that they're playing an important role in the society and in the economy. So the question is, given that opening, how do we take advantage of it? You guys are on the front line of trying to take advantage of it and move it forward. And I really fundamentally think that's what you're about. What you're about is making your issues, these issues you're talking about today, front and center in the national policy discussion and in Oregon's policy discussion, and then moving things forward. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Paul. I actually have a question for you. You talked about the intermediaries, and the question a lot of folks have is, what role do employers have of filling that role to some extent with wraparound supports? So we know with COVID that childcare has been one of the biggest hurdles for people returning to employment. Or as you talked about, sometimes there are intermediaries who provide help with car issues or small things. What role can an employer play in that system, trying to provide some of those wraparound supports?
Well, so employer, what you heard in the background was me moving my computer and knocking over half my furniture. That's life in the COVID world, right? That's life in the Zoom world, right? So a high-performing intermediary does the following. It recruits people who need help on the one hand. And secondly, it goes to its employer community and says, who are you going to need over the next 6 months and 2 years? And how can we help? How can we train people to meet those needs? That's step number one. So it's got these folks on hand. Now, in some cases, the intermediary does the training. And in some cases, the intermediary farms out or subcontracts the training through a community college. The intermediary always provides support services to help people stay in the program, fundamentally, to make it. Part of those support services are psychological, focus groups, keeping their animo going, right? Keeping their morale going. And part are financial. Very few intermediaries can do big financial things, right? But they can help with the car breaking down. They can help with the glasses. They can help with minor things. They can also make referrals. I'm hearing myself twice now. So they can also make referrals to social service agents. Employers who are thinking that they're going to be intermediaries certainly can play a role in some of these minor services, right? Breaking down the classes and so on. And that's a great idea.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to.
Let me say one more thing about intermediary.
Yeah.
There's a modern version of job training. All job training programs should look. That's what the intermediaries are.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, it's interesting. Would intermediaries, just one final question, be, nonprofit organizations, some of those types of community-based organizations who then work with the boards? Right. Okay.
So they can absolutely do that, and so can a business association. And you see all kinds of different aspects. And the workforce board has to be open.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. And speaking of the workforce board, that's actually going to be the folks on our next panel. So I sit on the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board. And just to let those of you who don't know, that board has the shared goal of the Oregon Business Plan is equitable prosperity for all Oregonians. And we do our work to advance Oregon through meaningful work, training, and education by empowering people and employers. And Paul was talking about the role of the workforce development boards. That is one of the things that this board, our board, oversees. And again, we assume everybody knows everything, but they don't always. So the workforce development system refers to the group of agencies, local workforce development boards, and community-based organizations in Oregon that provide some of these workforce services that Paul was just talking about to individuals and businesses. And this system has a wealth of services for job placement and training for youth and adults. And the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board, our role is to look throughout the state to try to figure out where the trends are. We've done summits on the future of work. We participate in things like this, and we try to bridge that gap, right, between employers and those who are seeking employment, and try to make that system more efficient. So looking at credentials of value, which we do root that conversation in community colleges, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, and also looking at those wraparound services. So the Workforce and Talent Development Board in the state of Oregon tries to step into that organizing and coordinating space. And so we have a really great panel with us today, and each of the panelists have been asked ahead of time to kind of help us reimagine how we can help adults and to some extent opportunity youth get the support and education they need to connect to these good jobs, but also, as I said, connect to the needs of employers. And so I would like to introduce our first panelist, who I'm sure enjoyed Paul's talk because it talked a lot about community colleges, Mark Matsui, who's the president of Portland Community College. Mark began his tenure at PCC in September 2016, and before joining PCC, he served as president of North Seattle College in Washington State and as a deputy assistant secretary for community colleges with the Office of Career and Technical Adult Education with the U.S. Department of Education. Mark also serves on the Oregon Workforce Talent Development Board. Next up, we will be joined by Ann Mercereau. She is the Vice President of Human Services, Diversity and Inclusion at Portland General Electric. Ann's efforts at PGE focus on attracting and retaining a diverse and inclusive and engaged workforce. She joined that company in 2009 and became vice president in 2016. Ann is the vice chair of the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board. And we will also be joined by Ken Madden. He's the owner of Madden Industrial. He is the chair of the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board. Ken is, as I said, the owner of Madden, which is an industrial staffing company that's been supporting businesses with skilled trades professionals and craftsmen in the Pacific Northwest for more than 30 years. Ken currently chairs, as I said, the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board, and he's been on the advisory board for Governor Brown on workforce matters. He has served on this board for more than 8 years, and he's active in many staffing organizations. And then finally, we'll have Heather Ficht. She is the executive director of East Cascade's Workforce Investment Board, East Cascade Works, the nonprofit organization that handles state and federal funds for training and assisting workers, as we just talked about, in a 10-county region from the Columbia Gorge to the Klamath Basin. Heather became involved in workforce development after running a job training program for young homeless people, and believes it that it is work rather that interrupts intergenerational poverty. So I'm excited to be joined by our panel, and I have some questions for them. Don't know if there they are. There we all are. Nice to see everyone's face. So that was, we've had some really interesting conversation from Ben and John and now Paul looking at education, looking at the state of employment, looking at the future of work. And so, as I said, we've given you all some topics to kind of consider. And I'll start with Mark, because community colleges featured prominently in the talk just before this. The role of equitable student access in producing the equitable recovery, that we're talking about. What does that look like? What is the role of community colleges, and what does that equitable result mean?
Well, thank you, Sherry. It's definitely predicated on the data that Ben shared earlier about outcomes in terms of economic mobility, resistance to unemployment, all of that being greater the higher the educational level. And so when we look at disparities in, let's say, economic outcomes, and we overlay outcomes in terms of the education system and disparities, inequitable disparities for student outcomes, I think you'll see a real strong correlation there. And that's why the Oregon community colleges are focused on equitable student success. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the community colleges are doing, but I really want to focus on a key area, and that has to do with the unmet basic needs of our students as key barriers to access and completion of their community college education and training programs. So we are engaged in a variety of different initiatives at Portland Community College, for example. We are pursuing guided pathways. All 17 community colleges now are part of guided pathways, and this is creating greater coherence and clearer pathways for students, both on the academic transfer track as well as career technical education. Also, the Oregon community colleges have established career pathways as a approach to improving equitable outcomes for students in career technical education. And these feature wraparound services, very clearly outline academic progressions and course progressions, employer engagement, and writing learning outcomes and objectives to the real world needs that employers have, and skills, knowledge, and abilities that are needed. In addition to these programs being relatively short, certificate oriented, with stackability, so that students don't have to start over when they come back in to skill up. And they match the busy lives of the average age of 28 of our students across the system, many of whom have families and are working while they go to school. I also wanted to sort of very briefly undergird my comments with the growing polarity in terms of income inequality across the country, but also in Oregon, the tale of two cities, the tale of two states, the have-lots and the have-nots in terms of that sort of growing divide. And to preface a very brief quote about the community college mission. And a friend of mine, Eduardo Padron, the recently retired president of Miami-Dade, likes to say that in our country, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And the community colleges, the workforce system is about creating opportunity that is as universal as the talent around us. And you've heard talk also about the need. In Oregon, there are 448,000 adults over the age of 25 with less than an associate's degree, making less than $15 an hour, and 275,000 of those adults have a high school credential or less. And they were left behind by the last recovery. They're at great risk of being left behind in the next recovery. This is a very diverse population. To give you an idea of scale, that's equal to about 9 graduating classes of high school seniors across the state. Nationally, we have 36 million adults at the lowest level of English literacy, and we only have enough public funding to educate 1 of the 36 million. And in addition, in Oregon, about 25% of adults are at the lowest level of numeracy. So we have a highly diverse population that was left behind by the last recovery, again, is at risk in the next recovery. And we know one thing, that during the recession and recovery cycles, the skills requirements tend to go up, right? There's structural job loss. The jobs that you lost in the recession are not necessarily the jobs that come back in the recovery, and the education and skill requirements just keep spiraling upward. In the last recovery, according to Georgetown, 99% of the jobs created in the last recovery did require some post-secondary education and training. So what can we do? We know that basic needs insecurity is a key barrier. In a recent survey of community college students, we saw that close to 20% of respondents indicated experience with houselessness, 51+% experienced housing insecurity, 40+% experienced food insecurity. It's really difficult to go to school and graduate if you're not sure where you're going to sleep, what you're going to eat for your next meal. And so, in addition to what I mentioned above, we really need a coordinated and concerted effort, an integrated way of addressing those unmet needs. So we have developed an initiative called Pathways to Opportunity, and this is a partnership across all 17 community colleges. Portland Community College is the lead college, and we are partnering with the Department of Human Services. They've been a fantastic partner to work with, and we are working on wrapping benefits like food stamps, TANF, and federal aid around the student all at the same time, so that they have food on the table, books in their backpack, a place to sleep while they're going to school. They're more likely then to graduate and get out and get those great jobs and help their families, help their communities. In addition to DHS, we have the Partners for Hunger-Free Oregon, Oregon Tradeswomen, the Oregon Food Bank, and many members of the Anti-Poverty Network, in addition to philanthropic support and some employers. I just wanted to end by adding a couple of data points. When students complete, the return on investment for Oregon community colleges for students is large. So every dollar a student invests, you get a $3.70 return. For taxpayers, it's $5.30 return. And for society writ large, it's over $12 for every dollar in reduced social costs. But this is really about students. And so I just wanted to end by providing a story, a student named Diem, who arrived in the United States 4 years ago with her family, including her 2 children, then ages 9 and 10. She didn't speak a word of English, and she turned to PCC for help. She started taking English classes and looked for a program that led to a career path, but without more direction, she was discouraged and didn't get very far. So one day in her ESOL class, her English as a second language class, a teacher mentioned a healthcare certificate, and that's when her path changed forever. Having been a caregiver to her parents, she knew that there was something in the work that she found inspiring. So she enrolled in healthcare career certificate cohort with integrated education and training. And this is where we combine English language acquisition and education with career technical education training at the same time. We contextualize, in other words, language skill building. And she completed the certificate with a 4.0 GPA in March of 2020. She stayed connected with her career pathway coaches. She took an interest in pharmacology, and with help of a grant from the STEP or SNAP training program, she went on to earn her provisional pharmacy tech license. And she's now employed with Fred Meyer Pharmacy, making a good wage. So that's what it's all about, is helping more DMs through these partnerships and collaborations across the state.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. Our next question is for Ann Mercereau. And we were talking a little bit about the role and value of apprenticeships in skill development. And then we're also talking kind of about what employers can do. What about every piece of the workforce system to help these dislocated workers?
Great. Thanks, Sherry. So I really appreciate being here with all of you today. And I want to start by talking a little bit about Portland General Electric to lay the context from my point of view. So a little bit about us. We're Oregon's largest electric utility, and we serve half of the state's population, or 3/4 of Oregon's businesses, which is roughly 900,000 customers. So we are deep in our community and also broad in terms of our generation of electricity. And we've been serving Oregonians for over 130 years and providing great living wage jobs. Today, we have roughly 3,000 employees and another 1,000 contract workers. So that's kind of the workforce that I get to help lead and strategize as we think about the topics that we're here today to discuss. And we're working hard to build this clean energy future, which, if you think about it, really translates into this idea of transforming into new work. And how do you have the skills and the workforce ready to take on those new skills and those jobs? And our customers, many of whom I think might be here today, increasingly want and expect their power to come from clean, renewable resources. And I'll tell you that I think it's the 14th year in a row PGE has been the #1 renewable power program in the nation. And I don't say that to brag just about PGE. All of you that are customers should be feeling really good about that yourselves, because you're making it happen. You are voluntarily saying, I want this new way and this new thing in terms of what my power is. Just like many other ways in which we're experiencing products and services, we want something that's better, cleaner, and more sustainable. And so you've all made that happen. And we are by far the #1 renewable power program by count in the nation. So what that means for us at PGE is that we are trying to think about, how do we continue to have products and services that are really centered on our customer and what their expectations are. And I was thinking about Dr. Osterman's words today and the challenge that he had for each one of us panelists, in terms of what role do we play in this system. And I'm excited for us to kind of think about, like, how can we imagine something that's different and transformational. So I think about COVID, and while this has been just a crisis that none of us could have even imagined 200 and I think John said 220 days ago, or whatever that number was. If anything else is in terms of being positive, I think what it's shown for us is that we can be nimble. We can solve problems faster and more effectively as it relates to trying to figure out how to adapt in this system. I'm not making a comment about our ability to solve the actual virus, but I'm talking about employers and systems and ability for us to pivot and start to think about differently about how we provide our services. So as an essential service employer provider, we had to quickly figure out, how are we going to keep the lights on 24/7? And so how am I to think about those 3,000 people, and how do I make sure that they keep being able to do their work? So that meant sending 2/3 of our workforce into their homes to work, and then another 1/3, or about 1,000 of our employees that you see out in the community, maybe working in your neighborhood or at a plant that's in your community, that has to come in and work in a way that's safe, and is providing social distancing. And we literally did it almost overnight. And I know many of you have very, very similar success stories. So I want us to take inspiration from our ability to pivot in something that's quite creates a lot of disruption and is quite devastating. But we know that we can adapt and pivot. And so I think, as I think about the challenge that John was laying down for us, I think there must be a way in which we can transform and pivot. And so, kind of going back to this idea of customers being at the center of what we do. So we think about it in terms of, what's our digital platform? How are we delivering a different digital experience for our customers? Or I think about, like, the city of Hillsborough that wanted to generate renewable power from an underground water pipeline. It's really about rethinking old ways of working and doing things. And so when I think about workforce development, I'm also inspired by an opportunity that I had a few years ago to visit Alder Elementary School, which really got me thinking about this idea of user centricity. So Alder Elementary is in Southeast Portland, and they have a high number of students that need wraparound services, similar to what President Mitsui was talking about. And that school wanted to redesign how they thought about student outcomes. So what they did is they put at the center of their redesign the parent. And they said the parent is there to help ensure that their child is successful. And if we help design a system in which the parent can parent and do those things, we think that we can be successful and have different student outcomes. And so at that school, they had 70 different providers that were pinging and interacting with these parents. And so what they did is they put someone in place that would work directly with the parent to say, what are your needs as it relates to navigating our systems? And then they redesigned their whole process so that that parent would work with that one person to say, what do you need? And then helping them to navigate. So instead of filling out a bunch of forms for different things, maybe I need assistance with housing, or I need assistance with food, etc. They just filled out a application for all the things that they needed. So to be more efficient and to be able to get them back to the job of parenting. And the school was able to enjoy huge leaps and bounds in terms of student outcomes, and also had huge impacts on teacher turnover, which prior to this had been quite high. And if you haven't had a chance to know about Alder, I would highly encourage you to see if you have an opportunity to go out there and visit the amazing work that they're doing. I thought the whole thing was genius, and it has continued to inspire me as I think about the work here at PGE and how we think about customer centricity and how do we imagine transformation. So when I think about the topic today, I imagine something very similar, and I've thought a lot about this, that what if we banded together and developed a strategy and approach that was entirely based around putting the worker at the center of our workforce development efforts? Right now we have the employer viewpoint, we might have the school view or education viewpoint, et cetera, and we're all doing really, really good things. And we have all these people out there, thousands of great people out there who have lost their jobs due to COVID, that are quite talented, that are looking for new opportunities. So how do you make that connection if you're that person? So imagine if you're at point A and you're that bartender that John was talking about earlier. How do you know about that adjacent job and what training to go to? And how do you think about those wraparound services that you need? My sense is that it's hard to get from one place to another. And then layer on top of that, if you're worrying about paying your bills and feeding your family and what's your next career job or move, it becomes quite complicated. So what I've thought about, and I think Dr. Osterman was talking about, is this idea of sort of this lifelong career coach or counselor, somebody that can help you navigate these systems and kind of knit things together in a way that makes a lot of sense. In other words, setting someone up for a lifetime of work. I think the skill websites like My Skills sound incredible in order to help provide information, but I'm thinking about just kind of a whole broad system that helps somebody navigate as they move through that whole piece. So education to training to job, etc. And I really think that if we made something like that come true here in Oregon, it could offer us some amazing outcomes for all of us as we work together as stakeholders, and offer more rapid results that will benefit workers and benefit employers. There's a couple of things that I learned from that trip out to Alder Elementary. One is that you need a collaborative approach. You have to agree to break down silos. We all have to yield unto each other into a system approach. And it would take technology. So again, like that My Skills website, things like that, where you have technology that makes it really easy for that dislocated worker or that worker to navigate and know how to move through move through the system to help transform our processes, and to be able to share data to match transferable skill sets and help career pathing between different sectors. And then I think about those wraparound services that Dr. Mitsui talked about, and how important the advocacy networks are to ensuring that people are able to thrive. And so I think about if we pool resources and we're able to benefit from an economy of scale, we should be able to better train, remove barriers, and help people to meet their occupational needs. So both on the employer side, but also on the worker side. And one of the things that they mentioned at Alder was that it wasn't easy to reframe their thinking. And I think about when you think about centricity and who's at the center, that I think that's the key. Like, where do you start? For whom are we all for whom are we all serving? And so you could, if you're a little cynical about employers, you might say, well, you're serving the shareholder. It takes a moment to say, at the end of the day, if you answer to a shareholder, how are you going to get there? Well, we believe firmly that we're going to get there with our people, right? And that if our people have a deep sense of well-being, we're going to be able to deliver on our promise to our shareholders, and first and foremost on our promise to our customers. And so what that looks like in terms of this sense of well-being is that people have financial well-being, they have social well-being, emotional well-being, and mental well-being. It's critically important. If those keys are not in place, how are they able to turn and serve our customers? So again, I'm just super happy to be here with you all today, and just want to encourage us to think about, how can we be transformational? We learned that we could do it at the beginning of COVID. So how can we organize ourselves? And do we do it by, do we as employers do it by job sector? Do we think about cross-functional imperatives? For us, that would be transportation, electrification. What are ways in which we come together, both the employer group, but then more broadly, all of us, in which to serve, in which to serve the people of Oregon? And I can tell you that creating that kind of lasting change is definitely something that I definitely want to be a part of. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today, and thank you for this opportunity.
All right, thank you so much, Anne. Now I'd like to chat with Ken, who is the chair of the Oregon Workforce and Talent Development Board. And I know, Ken, you have some kind of opening things you'd like to share with folks about the board, but then I'd also ask you to follow that up with the role and the value of apprenticeships in skill development.
Great. Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I think everybody can see the passion from the board, from the representatives we have on the panel today. But I will have to say, when the pandemic hit and then the forest fires followed after, there was a real coming together of our board to help solve some of the issues that our state was facing, or is going to be facing into the future. So I personally am very proud of the board and the members on our board and the staff as well. And I think Oregon should be as well. So I appreciate all that effort. And I did want to talk a little bit about apprenticeship. Obviously, my company is a staffing company. We've struggled with finding good people during both recessions and good times. And I saw a need for some type of training program that advanced people into some of the gaps that we had trying to find for our employer base. So, I have to go back to what Paul said earlier about the struggles of apprenticeship and the entire system. I think actually going through that process as an employer, it wasn't easy. It was actually one of the more difficult things I think I've had to do in a long, long time. We had to work with the Department of Labor, with the Bureau of Labor Industries in Oregon. We had to work with the educational system to develop a system that made sense and could train people to fill the gaps that we had. It was a learning process, and if it wasn't for my commitment to follow through on that process, I don't know if we would have done that. But the benefits to doing that are great. We found that it for us, it has added value to the employees that work for us, because they see this as an opportunity to advance and to come out of the system with a certificate that actually means something, that they can take if they choose to go to the next employer. They can take forward and advance themselves. We saw that as also another advantage to our employers, because our employers saw our ability to really help solve a problem when it comes to hiring good people, and to help them through the process of learning apprenticeship and on-the-work training. So this program has really truly paid off for us substantially. And a matter of fact, I'm in the process now of rolling 2 additional apprentices into our millwright maintenance program. and employees are stepping up, wanting to be a part of the program. Employers truly appreciate the fact that we are trying to solve some of these issues. So it also, the one added benefit, and this is probably my last talking point, but the last benefit, it does align the entire system. I know Paul talked about the difficulty of employers engaging with community colleges or with the workforce system. Well, when you finally get through that process, you understand that you help align the entire system. Educators are working to solve the issue of employers, and the state benefits as well. So there is a true win-win through all of this process, and that's something that I've found through it. So I think now that we've come through the other end, I think we can be a source of helping employers get through it as well. It's not as difficult as it needs to be, and I think once you've found somebody that has walked through the process, it's a lot easier to help other companies. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. Ken is like, I'm going to get efficient there for you. So now I'm going to toss it over to Heather. And, what about all these factors that lead to, you need to be coordinated, but you also need to have localized solutions. And, what does that look like, collaborating across workforce and education?
Thank you, Sherry. And I like to think of workforce development as a team sport. No one of us are going to succeed alone. And all those really important supports and programs and services that were just shared by my esteemed colleagues require some level of coordination and sometimes, frankly, translation to really work in concert to support both people and businesses in a more holistic way. So we know coordination is essential. But further, if you look at John Tapania, as he pointed out in the Oregon Talent Assessment, there's also a significant amount of geographic variation, as well as different strategies that might be needed to serve different kinds of groups, the emergent workforce versus like low-wage workers that have been displaced. So it's really about solutions that need to be localized. And the good news is, in Oregon, the federally funded workforce structure exists, and that supports the convening and coordination role across sectors, partnerships across state agencies, nonprofits, community colleges, trades, economic development, and industry or business. And that's the local workforce board structure. So you've heard Sherry and Ken and others talk about the state workforce talent development board. Well, in Oregon, I represent one of 9 local workforce development agencies, and we are designated by the governor and designed to support localized solutions. So we are all nonprofit organizations, and we don't deliver direct service, and that's on purpose. And that's to ensure that we are neutral. So we oversee the public workforce system in Oregon, and it's branded as WorkSource. We also are an investor in that system. And so I got really excited about Dr. Osterman's slide on the regional compacts. I think that is exactly where we should be going as a system. I think state agencies need to be added to that list as they're often service providers within that system. And some thoughts that I have about as we move forward and just in light of the challenges that we're facing, really needing to, as a state, take advantage of and maximize the flexibility that exists in all workforce funds that we have in the state, frankly, education funds, economic development funds. And frankly, if the rules don't work for Oregon, I think we should be seeking waivers and asking for the ability to do things different. One thing that I know, living in Oregon for 25 years, is this is one innovative state. We have got really good ideas. And we collectively need to have a greater willingness to do things differently. I'd love us to really look at how things are currently organized and see where it can be further efficiencies and further improvements to service delivery are possible. I also think that workforce development and economic development are like cookies and milk. They belong together. And anything we can do to further opportunities to more thoughtfully and strategically align and leverage each other at the local level the more effective and the more rapid our recovery can be. We've got to be nimble, and we've got to do continuous improvement. We really need to be looking at, are the strategies we're implementing, are they working? We cannot be rigid in these times. We have to maximize flexibility. So I think with that, I will pass it back to you, Sherry. Those were just my thoughts on where to go.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I know we have so much good content, and I also know people get Zoom fatigue, and we're near the end of our time. But some of the major themes that came out of today are alignment of resources, alignment of providers in the system, centering employees, and looking at educational opportunities, innovative ways to bring skilling and training, apprenticeships, and other ways to bring folks into the system. And then we heard that our system has a lot of flexibility. It has a lot of growth. We actually may have what we need. The question may be, how do we organize it? Maybe right now we have all the elements, and we might even have all the money we need, which sometimes is hard to think about. But the question is, how do we deploy it? So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for being here. I want to take a moment to, again, thank all of our speakers. I want to thank our sponsors of the Oregon Business Plan and Leadership Summit series. Their sponsorship has allowed us to offer these virtual events at no cost and to provide more equitable access to these conversations as we move forward together. Join me in thanking MJ Murdoch Charitable Trust, Bank of America, the Pape Group, Tillamook County Creamery Association, AdDeck, the Dusky Goose, Oregon Business and Industry, Pacific Power, Portland General Electric, Springboard Group, Dutch Brothers, Hoffman Construction Company, Kaiser Permanente, Northwest Natural, Ocho Lumber Company, Portland Trailblazers, Lemelson Foundation, and U.S. Bank. I want to thank you all for your ongoing leadership and for your support of the Oregon Business Plan, and thank you all for attending, and have a great evening.